This happens to be a place had the privilege to travel to this summer. It's in northern Montana, and it's at a very high elevation in Glacier National Park. And I was just very much taken away by this place because it seemed like such a transition from our world to worlds beyond. And also, had the privilege of reading George William Russell, and he is an Irish Theosophist, but who is also very much of a mystic. And he was of that Irish tradition of Keats and Yeats, and William Quan Judge. They were colleagues. And George William Russell really writes exquisitely, I think, about nature and about the hidden side of nature. And he writes something here in some of his writings that are called The Candle of Vision. And he writes, I entitled this little piece, Spiritual Communion. He says, so the lover of earth obtains his reward, and little by little the veil is lifted of an inexhaustible beauty and majesty. It may be he will be tranced in some spiritual communion, or will find his being overflowing into the being of the elements, or become aware that they are breathing their life into his own. Or earth may become, on an instant, all fairy to him, and the earth and air resound with the music of its invisible people. Or the trees and rocks may waver before his eyes and become transparent, revealing what creatures were hidden from him by the curtain. And he will know, as the ancients did, of Dryad and Hamadryad, of genii of wood and mountain. Or earth may suddenly blaze about him with supernatural light in some lonely spot amid the hills. And he will find he stands as the prophet in a place that is holy ground. And he may breathe the intoxicating exhalations as did the sibyls of old. Or his love may hurry him away in dream to share in deeper mysteries. And he may see the palace chambers of nature where the wise ones dwell in secret, looking out over the nations, breathing power into this man's heart or that man's brain, or any who appear to their vision to wear the color of truth. So gradually, the earth lover realizes the golden world is all about him in imperishable beauty, and he may pass from the vision to the profounder beauty of being, and know an eternal love is within and around him, pressing upon him and sustaining with infinite tenderness his body, his soul, and his spirit. So, as was indicated in the flyer, that what we're looking for in this presentation, in this journey together, is a deeper, more intimate, more aesthetically oriented kind of an ecology, kind of an approach to all of life. In the 70s, well, actually in the 50s and the 60s, there were great thinkers in the Americas and in Europe who were really getting concerned about what human beings were doing to our planet. And there was a Norwegian philosopher, Arnaeus, who pioneered something that he called deep ecology. And as we know, ecology is a system study that's really oriented towards the interrelationships of species and all sorts of systems biologically. And what Arnaeus meant by deep ecology was saying that every species has its own innate worth, above and beyond what it just means to the human species. And even now, there's this kind of dynamic going on in the world of ecology that's utilitarian and is based on the survival of the human species and so forth, without regard to the living system of nature. In other words, we have to keep nature going so we can keep going. And what some of these pioneers are doing is they're saying, wait a minute, nature is a living system into and of herself, and we may or may not be part of it, but that the real approach, and if we're really going to get anywhere with the ecological movement, we have to think about nature as an end in and of herself. Also, some of you may be familiar with the work of Satish Kumar. He was the editor of Resurgence and Ecology magazine, and he's started so many wonderful movements. And he is known for doing walks all the way from India to the Americas to Europe and so forth. He really follows in a Gandhian tradition. And he is saying that the aesthetics is what we have to pay attention to. And it's interesting that HPB, in her article, Civilization, the Death of Art and Beauty, she talks about a lot of things that we now would recognize as ecology in that article. But the article is fundamentally about aesthetics, about beauty. And I think that is kind of HPB's approach to this whole thing, because really it gets into revering nature and a reverence for nature. And that's what a lot of this presentation will be about. Satish Kumar writes, "We are so obsessed with speed, quantity, and progress that the place of quality, beauty, ethics, and aesthetics has been much ignored. The arts have become confined to professions rather than in everyday life." So I think that's a great clue that we all have to begin to adopt this kind of artistic perspective. In order to restore aesthetics, we need to slow down. We need to develop appreciation, respect, and above all, reverence for material objects. We need to treat them with care and consideration. There's a conversation that Satish Kumar had with several other great thinkers, and it was at a forum in Japan a few years ago, a little over a decade ago. And here are some of his answers to their questions. He says, at the moment, even our environmental movement is very much working on a reductionist principle. They often take one single issue: global warming, recycling, organic farming, whole foods, or whole health. Whatever it is, they generally say we must protect nature, that if we don't, it will damage human health and well-being, the human future. All of this is single issue oriented, human-centered thinking. I call utilitarian ecology. You look at a tree and say, we must take care of this, plant more trees like it, because this tree is useful. It will give us wood. It will give us oxygen. It will give us beauty. He continues. He's a little bit saying, where's the spirituality? In this world, large numbers of people are still religious, whereas the environmental movement is generally rather rational, intellectual. We can almost say atheistic. They don't consider the divine, sacred, spiritual dimension of our existence. But whether you are a Taoist or Shintoist, a Buddhist, Jain, Hindu, or Christian, a Jew or a Muslim, whatever you are, The majority of people are still religious. I would like to connect this spiritual dimension with the ecological dimension. And I call this reverential ecology. It's kind of a Hindu idea, he says, that nature itself is divine. There's a difference between considering the divine in nature and nature as divine. Nature is totally good in itself. You develop a reverence for trees, for forests, reverence for rivers and for mountains, reverence for birds, animals, and insects. And all of that reverence for life becomes the basis of our environmental thinking. Whatever your religious tradition, reverence for life is common to all. And when we appeal to people's deeper heart, rather than just their physical needs, that is reverential ecology. And this is reminiscent of one of the emphasis from HPB in The Secret Doctrine, where she's saying no human-born doctrine, no creed, however sanctified by custom and antiquity, can compare in sacredness with the religion of nature. And I think she's saying here that that's what Theosophy actually is. It's not invented by external reductionistic means or methods. It's just the study of nature. And it's the whole, what it means to be a theosophist is learning how to ask questions of nature. And in antiquity, there's this idea in Norse mythology, for example, of this great tree of life. And Thomas Carlyle writes, it is Yggdrasil, the tree of existence. It is the past, the present, and the future. What was done, what is doing, what will be done, the infinite conjugation of the verb to do. It's everything that's going on. It's all of manifestation, and it's all one living system. This is a radical reorientation of one's outlook, that everything is alive, everything's all part of one system, and that everything's all part moving in one direction, that all the parts have something in common, which is their relation to all the other parts, and that all the parts are mirrors of all the other parts. And then in the Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 15, there's this idea of the tree of life, but it's upside down. What's going on with that? The asvata, says Krishna, the eternal sacred tree, grows with its roots above and its branches below, and the leaves of which are the Vedas. He who knows this knows the Vedas. So again, we have this idea of the tree of manifestation, but look where its roots are. Its roots are coming from the heavens. They are coming from the sky, you could say. They are coming from that which is unmanifest. And that is part of this idea of a deep reverential theosophical ecology, one would suggest, is that everything comes from the unmanifest and then becomes the visible, which is the tree that you see. And the branches become more complex, etc. And the leaves come from that tree. In other words, all the wisdom of humanity really comes from that living system. So it's not a superimposed system of ideas, but they come out of the tree of life itself. And he who understands this can begin to understand the Vedas, which would be, we would think that all of spiritual scripture, no matter what kind of religious system. And then in the 10th chapter, Krishna says, "But what, O Arjuna, hast thou to do with so much knowledge as this? I established this whole universe with a single portion of myself and remain separate. So everything comes out of the unmanifest, and yet there's something about the unmanifest that is not dependent on that which is manifest. Normally, in normal materialistic science, we think that everything is all about the manifest. And if there's something unmanifest, then that's something that is yielded from the manifest. In this idea of antiquity, the ancients thought that everything proceeded from the unmanifest. And that just because we don't know about something, that doesn't mean that we can't have a certain reverence for it, certain awe, a sense of wonder. Because actually, a sense of wonder requires a certain agnosticism. And agnosticism isn't a dead end of darkness. It's really the idea that there must be something beyond, and that perhaps it looks like darkness to me, but who knows? At some higher level, if maybe I were gifted with higher senses, maybe I would see what I thought was darkness as actually a source of light. Arjuna is thinking about this idea of the unmanifest and the invisible and the divine. And he gets up the nerve to ask Krishna about something. He says, I desire to see thy divine form, O sovereign Lord. Wherefore, O Lord, if thou thinkest it may be beheld by me, show me, O master of devotion, thine inexhaustible self. That's in chapter 11. And Krishna's, well, I don't have a slide depicting the invisible form of Krishna, but suffice it to say that it's everything all at once, that it's all time, space, and motion at once. It's all geometry at once. It's all the stars in the universe at once, past, present, and future. Needless to say, it's too much for Arjuna, and he's not to be faulted for this. I just think it's amazing that he had the nerve to ask the question. And Krishna, first of all, Arjuna says, "Oh, can I see you back according to your normal form, please? Your normal forearm shape," he says. Like that's normal. Um, so Krishna says, "Thou hast seen this form of mine, which is difficult to be perceived, and which even the gods are always anxious to behold. But I am not to be seen, even as I have shown myself to thee by the study of the Vedas, nor by mortifications, nor almsgiving, nor sacrifices." So study, mortifications, almsgiving, sacrifices, that's not enough. What is enough? Krishna says, "I am to be approached and seen and known in truth by means of that devotion which has me alone as the object." So there's something about this devotion where it is actually becoming one with something, and becomes where one becomes true to something. Like this image here, where Arjuna is in this intimate conversation with his teacher. And the devotion implies a commitment. And through this devotion, the hidden side of nature can be revealed. And then in the next chapter, in chapter 12, Arjuna's thinking some more. And he's thinking, okay, so people can worship you in your visible form, But there's also this whole transcendent side of you. Krishna, in this case, meaning nature. Which one's better? Arjuna wants to know. Arjuna, he says, Lord, of the men who serve thee true in heart, as God revealed, which is the visible side, and, or of the men who serve worshiping the unrevealed, unbodied, far, which to me means transcendent, which take the better way of faith and life. Krishna's response is, he says, okay, whoever serves me as I show myself, constantly true, in full devotion fixed, those hold I very holy. So those who worship the visible side of nature and who see the self in all, that's considered by Krishna to really be a very holy thing, not knocking it. But those who serve, worshiping me, the one, the invisible, the unrevealed, unnamed, unthinkable, uttermost, all-pervading, highest, sure, who thus adore me, mastering their senses, of one set mind to all, glad in all good, these blessed souls come unto me. So one is Krishna considering such a being to be very holy. The other is recognizing that the soul has become one with Krishna, that they're through devotion, through adoration, that there's such thing as actual yoga or union with the divine. But notice how it has to do with a transformation going on within the human being. The senses become mastered. There's a certain equal-mindedness toward all people. It's really the fundamental principle of the second object, isn't it, in the Theosophical Society? Of equal-mindedness towards all. A recognition of the divine in all human beings and in all of nature. Glad in all good, never jealous, etc. Glad about the good, whenever it can be found. These are the blessed souls who come to me. So this seems to be a clue about real occultism. And I would say that that's what this presentation is also about. What is occultism? Here's something from HPB that is kind of like the worship and the adoration of the transcendent in nature. The silent worship of abstract or noumenal nature, the only divine manifestation, is the one ennobling religion of humanity. HPB, as many of you know, has an article called What Are the Theosophists, which to me has always been kind of a funny name. Instead of who are the Theosophists, it's like, what are these things? Who are these? What kind of people are these people? And she writes, it's almost surprising, it's almost jarring the way she talks about what Theosophists actually are. She's saying they're just original thinkers. That's a Theosophist. All original thinkers and investigators of the hidden side of nature, whether materialists, those who find in matter the promise and potency of all terrestrial life, or spiritualists, that is, those who discover in spirit the source of all energy and of matter as well, were and are, properly, Theosophists. So you can even be an atheist. You can be any religion you want. No religion. It's people who are original thinkers and investigators of the hidden side of nature. She continues, for to be one, that is a theosophist, one need not necessarily recognize the existence of any special god or deity. One need but worship the spirit of living nature. and try to identify oneself with it. To revere that presence, the invisible cause, which is yet ever manifesting itself in its incessant results, the intangible, omnipotent, and omnipresent Proteus, indivisible in its essence and eluding form, it appearing under all and every form, was here and there and everywhere and nowhere, is all and nothing, ubiquitous yet one, the essence filling, binding, bounding, containing everything, contained in all. And finally, she says in the same article, I think it will, we think, be seen now that whether classed as theists, pantheists, or atheists, such men are all near kinsmen to the rest. Be what he may, once that a student abandons the old and trodden highway of routine and enters upon the solitary path of independent thought, Godward, he is a theosophist, an original thinker, a seeker after the eternal truth, with an inspiration of his own to solve the universal problems. So she's referring here once again to something going on inside the seeker, where a seeker is letting go of their old habits. They're abandoning the old and trodden highway of routine within themselves. This is where the breakthrough happens. And this is like two ends of the same spectrum, really. There's the idea of a reverence, where one is no longer thinking about one's own personality so much, except as it is, as a part of nature, right? But thinking of that which is always beyond. And one has become a sojourner on the solitary path of independent thought. HPV points out that there's really four aims that she's trying to accomplish in the secret doctrine. And she has them in a single sentence with semicolons, but I put them here numerically. But these words are hers. She says that one of the aims of the secret doctrine is to show that nature is not a fortuitous concurrence of atoms, and to assign to man his rightful place in the scheme of the universe, and to rescue from degradation the archaic truths which are the basis of all religions, and to uncover, to some extent, the fundamental unity from which they spring, and finally to show that the occult side of nature has never been approached by the science of modern civilization. And I think that that's what Satish Kumar is getting at, is that real approaching nature, which is what we really have to do in order to save nature, really saving nature from ourselves. Because once we quit damaging nature, nature will heal herself. She's a living system and she wants to live. Then we have to get out of this materialistic idea, and it's the materialism that's actually causing the trouble. William Quan Judge, in an article called Synthesis of Occult Science, writes, he says, this philosophy is not simply synthetical in its methods, but it is synthesis itself. It regards nature as one complete whole. Then he says something really revolutionary. The synthesis of occult science becomes, therefore, the higher synthesis of the faculties of man. So here, this idea of approaching nature as a complete whole, this has to do with the synthesis of the higher faculties within each of us. It can't be divorced. The proper regard of nature can't be divorced from this attunement and merging into of the higher faculties in a human being. A lot of us are familiar with the so-called page 200 diagram. Maybe there's different publications of the secret doctrine. But in one publication, it's on page 200, where there's this great diagram talking about the 7 planes and so forth, 3 of which are arupa planes, which are unmanifest, and 4 of which are more manifest. And I won't get into that diagram because it's very technical. But on the page prior to that, she talks about attunement and the importance of attunement. That really what we're becoming is we need to become attuned to nature, attuned to all of the planes in the cosmos. And she says these 7 planes correspond to the 7 states of consciousness in man. It remains with him to attune the 3 higher states in himself to the 3 higher planes in cosmos. But before he can attempt to attune, he must awaken the 3 seats to life and activity. So there is that which within ourselves that needs to be awakened. And it is these great universal ideas in Theosophy that helps awaken those centers within our constitution. And by awakening these higher senses within and these higher faculties of spiritual cognition within, we can then become attuned to the higher planes in the cosmos. Now, there are a few slides here that I wanted to share where William Q. Judge has a contribution to what some of this higher attunement might entail. But these are very simple aphorisms. And actually, these 14 aphorisms that I'm going to go through were not put together and all in one place by William Q. Judge. It was students of his later that went through different statements of Judge's talking about what is occultism. And it's interesting that the first one here is occultism is not telling all one knows, but it's reticence. So it isn't infinite speculation. It isn't talking too much. It's reverence. And in the quietude of reverence for the hidden side of nature, perhaps one will not speak. It's not saying all that one suspects, but silence. It's not speaking of all one sees, but reverting inward to the source of sight. It's not repeating everything that one hears, but a closed mouth, lest hearing should escape therethrough. It's not speaking of the faults of others, but charity. Occultism is not setting a fixed plans, but a fluidic position balanced in the good law. It's not laying down for another his duty, but self-watchfulness in performing one's own. Very Taoistic. Occultism is not doing what one wishes when one wants, but discipline. It's not listening to gossip or slander, but goodwill to all, from which gossip and slander can draw no sustenance. Occultism is not giving away to anger or impatience, but calmness. Occultism is not being vain of one's learning or proud, but it's humility. It's not hurrying one's daily affairs. That's what Satish Kumar was talking about. We need to just slow down. It's not hurrying one's daily affairs, nor forcing one's progress, but knowing the amplitude of time in all things. Occultism is the not doing all the great work there is to do, but the will to labor, the willingness to accept help or be a helper, the joy that another does a task the best. And finally, it's not the striving to be a leader of men, but it has to do with following a line. One theosophical writer that I've been reading quite a bit of lately is Raghavan Iyer. And he summarizes 5 qualities or criteria that would go into this idea of what I think is a theosophical ecology and this idea of a reverence for the living spirit of nature. And he writes here, in this one here, first is reverence for the great sacrifice and the hierophantic host under the eternal initiator of initiates, the evergreen trees of knowledge. I think that's the Mahatmas. Enlightenment and immortality. And this in turn would show as a true reverence for nature. It's interesting, this very mystical idea about the great sacrifice, the initiator of initiates, and thinking about sages who have been walking the earth for millions of years, many times in secret. These are the evergreen trees of knowledge and enlightenment. And this in turn would become a true reverence for nature. In other words, these great beings are part of nature as much as trees and rocks and rivers. Secondly, there would be a longing for ideal forms and archetypes, a pure love of truth, beauty, and goodness in all forms. Adoration for archetypes. Isn't that beautiful? There'd be an innate conviction, regardless of culture, that the sexual act is sacred, that the lesser mysteries of Eros must mirror the pristine light of the Logos invoked through sound and silence in the greater mysteries. Fourthly, there would be devotion, the only feeling that which is really natural to the hearts of men and women of all races, common to the human babe and the young of animals. Devotion, understood rightly, shows in the rishis and sages, as well as in a child's simplicity which coexists with authentic solemnity and inner depth. Inherent in the human heart is the ever-present sense of the sacred. And finally, is the idea that really the human body is a temple, not a tomb. And it's a temple of a God, really, of this pilgrim soul in every person. So it seems that if a person understands why one is here, one will see the body as a temple. And one wonders if there's this false idea that the body is something bad, something dirty, that's why we're so hard on nature, why we're so abusive to all of nature. And there's this final sentence that I'll read from him, where he's making, Raghavan Iyer is making a commentary on an essay by George William Russell, who we read from in the very beginning, on the candle of vision. And he writes, "We must live as if there is a tremendous sanctity to everything we touch. Bathing is a sacrament. Eating is sacred. Sharing the presence of other human beings is a privilege. These are among the forgotten truths which need to be rekindled in contemporary society. The innate decencies of ancient cultures can be brought into a vibrant conception of soul civility in daily life. I think that's my last slide. There we go. So I'll stop sharing.